Welcome to the SkiBallin Podcast. It's week 5, it's free agency time. So we're going to kick it off with every single team. I'm going to go through some of the notes that every single team made. Obviously, I'm not going to go through every signing, but pretty close to it. I would say like half the signings because some of them are pretty impactful for some of these teams, but I'm not going to go through every one of them just because much time. So I'm going to try to keep things as brief as possible. So we're going to start off with the Cardinals, who first off signed J.R. Sweezy and Marcus Gilbert to try to revamp the offensive line because obviously their offensive line was absolutely terrible last season. So they're trying to get those two signings to try to help that. Let's see if it goes for them. Wide receivers, they got Kevin White from the Chicago Bears. He definitely has not worked out for the Bears when he was there. A lot of injury problems and inconsistencies really forced their hand to release him, so they got him. They also got Terrell Suggs. That's the big one, of course. Terrell Suggs, the former Baltimore Raven, longtime Baltimore Raven. Since he's a veteran linebacker, he does bring a great locker room presence. He's a leader out there in the defense, and he was a leader out there for the Baltimore Ravens. So they're going to have a hard time replacing him, I think, in the Ravens' defensive squad. But they get a good linebacker here for the Cardinals and a good leader in Terrell Suggs. Then they also got Jordan Hicks. Jordan Hicks has also been a pretty big impact for the Eagles when he was there as the linebacker. So they get another defensive weapon for them, so hopefully that works out for the Cardinals there. Then we go on to the Falcons. This is all in alphabetical order, by the way. They signed Grady Jarrett, and they didn't sign him. They tagged him, so they will keep Grady Jarrett on the team. He was a big impact on the defensive line for them. They also got Justin Hardy back for a year. He's a pretty good wide receiver when they need him to, so hopefully that keeps working out for him because they still could use Justin Hardy out there. Then they got James Carpenter for 4 years because they had to release some of their offensive line, so they're trying to re-sign some other guys on the offensive line, including James Carpenter, and they signed them for 4 years, so hopefully that keeps working out for them. Then we go on to the Ravens, who signed Mark Ingram for 3 years. They get a good weapon in the running game because they definitely needed it with Mark Ingram, so that's good for them. And they also got Earl Thomas, of course, for 4 years for $55 million, so that gives them at least kind of a replacement leader for Terrell Suggs since he left. But Earl Thomas being there should make a big presence. Not sure how he's doing with his injuries problems, but hopefully he'll revamp it or pretty much fix it when he comes in next season. And they also re-signed RG3 so they can still have a solid backup quarterback if they need to. Then we go on to the Panthers. The Panthers signed Bruce Irvin for a year. Bruce Irvin hasn't really been the same ever since he left Oakland after his 2 productive years, but then injuries started getting to him and his age started getting to him, I think. And I think ever since then he kind of went downhill. But he definitely also was the impact of the Seattle Seahawks team when the Legion of Boom was there. So now the Panthers get him, but only for a year. So he has to prove that he can still be an impactful defensive weapon there on that side of the ball. And they also signed Matt Pardis, the center, for 3 years since they had to release Ryan Khalil, the center, as well. The Buffalo Bills, they signed Cole Beasley for 4 years, the former Dallas Cowboy, for $29 million. They got a really good steal out of him, so they're expecting big things from him. They signed Frank Gore back. They signed Frank Gore from the Dolphins, so Frank Gore is still going on through his career, and he's going with the Bills to try to get maybe a tandem with LaShawn McCoy going. Bills also signed Andre Roberts, the special teams returner. So he's a very good returner, one of the best out there. So the Bills get a huge weapon in that. And then they also got Mitch Morse, the center from Kansas City, the former Kansas City Chief. They signed him for 4 years and $45.5 million. So that's a very good, solid signing for them to keep going with the offensive line. That's starting to grow a little bit. And then the Bears we go on. They signed Buster Skrine for 3 years. He was from the Jets. That's a good nickel corner to keep as they had to get rid of Bryce Callahan. So they get Buster Skrine. He's a pretty good corner. I saw him during the preseason in some of his games. He was not too bad of a nickel corner. Then they also got HaHa Clinton-Dix a year for $3.5 million. So he's kind of on a prove-it deal, but that still is a solid signing too because now with Adrian Amos gone, Clinton-Dix will be lined up now with Eddie Jackson in the backfield, so that's still good for them. And they also signed Cordell Patterson. He was with the Patriots just this past season, but he was also used a lot when he was with the Minnesota Vikings, so he's going to have a familiar face when he faces the Vikings 2 games during the next season. And then he was signed for 2 years and $10 million, so that's a pretty big signing. Pretty good signing for the Bears there. Well, hopefully that works out for their special teams, especially. The Bengals signed Preston Brown to get a linebacker weapon on defense. And they also re-signed Denard to solidify there. And then they also re-signed Eifert for another year to try to prove that his injuries problems are flukes. But unfortunately, I don't know if that's going to change. But hopefully that does change because Eifert's been on the bad end of things as far as injuries go for the past couple seasons. Moving on to the Cleveland Browns, and boy, oh boy, did the Cleveland Browns make moves. Oh boy, let's get this started. So first of all, the big ones, of course, the biggest one, of course, is getting OBJ and Olivier Vernon from the trade of trading Jabril Peppers and Kevin Zeitler. This was definitely not a trade that was going to be. It was going to be easy. But getting Odell Beckham Jr., probably literally one of the best wide receivers out there in the league, and also getting a very good pass rusher in Olivier Vernon, and they had to get rid of their best offensive guard and a pretty good safety in Jabril Peppers. So this was a pretty big trade, but in the end, I think that really helps them because now they have 2 huge weapons in Beckham and Landry and David Njoku. So that's 3 huge weapons right there, and of course you got Nick Chubb in the backfield. So that's, this offense is getting somewhere. But at this point, the Browns just look like they're going to be dangerous, very, very dangerous coming next season. Then they also got Sheldon Richardson, too, in the defense, too. So that's another 3 years and $36 million for him. So you already pair him up with Myles Garrett, and you already have Jamie Collins in the linebacker core. So you pretty much have a great front 7 already. This team is going somewhere. So, see, this is why the season predictions I made in, the first, 2 weeks of this podcast was because this is going to happen. And now that this happens, I pretty much have to go back and say the Browns are going to win even more games at this point. And probably win the AFC North because I don't know if Pittsburgh can compete with this kind of weapons. But again, we'll see how that happens. Hopefully they make this work because the Browns need some kind of help if they can. So, moving on to the Dallas Cowboys, they get Jason Witten and DeMarcus Lawrence and Randall Cobb. Those 3 guys right there. They tag Lawrence, so that's good. They keep the great pass rusher. They get Jason Witten back from retirement, and they get Randall Cobb, the guy from Green Bay, for 1 year. I think they want him to prove it first, so that makes a great offense right there. You got Ezekiel Elliott in the backfield. As long as Prescott can accurately throw the ball for the Cowboys, they have Zeke Elliott in the backfield, Randall Cobb, Amari Cooper, Jason Witten to throw to, and I'll even add in Michael Gallup, who's a deep threat on the outside. So that's great weapons for the Dallas Cowboys. They just need to be able to work with that system. Hopefully that works out for them because they could really make a deep run in the playoffs if they do. And if their defense is solidified like they were last year, they could go even further than that. Then we go to the Denver Broncos. They get Bryce Callahan, as I said, from the Bears, who they released. And they also got Joe Flacco to try to get the quarterback position fixed again. I don't know exactly what the Broncos are thinking here. So, the veteran quarterback train just seems to keep dying down every year, and I don't know what the Broncos have to do to pretty much get rid of this problem. My guess is that they want to sign Flacco this time for the 4th rounder pick, and then they also want to be able to draft the quarterback maybe in the 1st round too. So maybe they want to do both and then see what works after that. But they pretty much get him for nothing. They get him for a 4th round pick too, so that's still a good deal for them anyway. And they also got Kareem Jackson for 3 years and $33 million, so they get another defensive guy there, so that's good for them. And be able to still pair up somebody with Chris Harris Jr., because I think after getting rid of Aqib Talib, it really hasn't been the same there, as it was 3 years ago or something. So they have to be able to, they want to still be able to kind of keep building on that secondary right there. Moving on to the Detroit Lions, they signed Danny Amendola, the former Patriot, and he returns with Matt Patricia. So Amendola comes with a $4.5 million guaranteed contract. He's getting up to $5.75 million for incentives. So that's still a good deal for the Lions. He's on a prove-it deal, but that's basically where they are at right now. Then Trey Flowers, they get him for 5 years. That's the big signing right there. They needed some spark on defense, and I think Trey Flowers is the way to go. And, of course, he also returns with Matt Patricia, so this works in favor of the line of Matt Patricia and the defensive-minded head coach there. And they also got Jesse James, the tight end, the former Pittsburgh Steeler, for 4 years, $25 million they signed him for, and $11 million guaranteed. It's kind of pretty hefty baggage there for Jesse James. Hopefully he proves it, but the Lions do need a tight end, so hopefully he'll be the guy that they can answer for. Then the Green Bay Packers, they're the ones that signed Adrian Amos for 4 years and $37 million. So they basically exchanged safeties with the Bears. So the Bears have Clinton Dix, and now the Packers have Amos. So that's gonna be an interesting rivalry game when the next season comes. And then the Packers also got Preston Smith and Zadarius Smith. Preston Smith from the Washington Redskins. That's a huge signing right there. But they lose Clay Matthews. So they lost Clay Matthews and Jake Ryan. So they're trying to get 2 more linebackers in to replace them there and to try to help their defense out. Then the Texans tagged Clowney, and they also got Bradley Roby from the Broncos, and they got Tayshaun Gibson from the Jags. That's pretty good to try to get their defense and their secondary, especially their secondary, who kind of struggled out last year with Tyrann Mathieu not doing his best. And they got Gibson and Roby to try to get the secondary more solidified there. So Gibson will probably line up with Justin Reed at the safety position, so hopefully they can get some more things going in those defensive plays. Then the Indianapolis Colts, they signed Justin Houston for 2 years. From the Kansas City Chiefs, they get a good defensive leader right there. He's an aged veteran, but he's a very good leader on defense to have. And they also got Matt Khalil, the brother of Ryan Khalil, as the offensive tackle to try to solidify even more their already amazing offensive line, maybe even a backup offensive tackle if they need him. They re-signed Desir, so they get solidified Desir with there. And then they also got Devin Funchess for a year. Devin Funchess was the former Carolina Panther wide receiver, so he's a pretty good target. I mean, Devin Funchess not too long ago was pretty much the number 1 wide receiver for the Panthers. So if the Colts can find a way to use him along with T.Y. Hilton, they could be a even more prolific offense than they were last season. Then the Jaguars, they signed Nick Foles for 4 years. This is the big signing that pretty much everybody saw coming as soon as the new league year hit. So they signed him for 4 years and $88 million. Man, oh man, that's a hefty price for the Super Bowl MVP. But they're really banking on his success, so hopefully that works out for them. And they also got Jake Ryan from the Packers for 2 years to try to help out their defense even more. Kansas City Chiefs, they get Honey Badger Tyrann Mathieu from the Houston Texans instead. So they get a 3-year, and he goes there for 3 years and $42 million. So that's a pretty big contract for him there. Hopefully he proves that one there. And they also made some other signings like Carlos Hyde and Alex Okafor from the Saints. Alex Okafor to try to replace those defensive linemen, those defensive guys that the Chiefs lost, and especially since they lost D Ford. So they got Alex Okafor from the Saints to try to help solidify that. Then the Chargers, they got Tyrod Taylor signed to get a backup for Phillip Rivers. They also got Thomas Davis, the veteran linebacker from the Carolina Panthers, former Carolina Panther, 2 years for $10.5 million. He's a good leader to have on defense. They re-signed a lot of guys. They re-signed Adrian Phillips, Brandon Mebane, and Rashawn Perryman to try to solidify their defense. They're really good defense. They're cover 3 scheme defense. They're very talented there, but they just need to be able to do a little more things to cover 3, I feel. So hopefully that they will try to work on their defensive schemes during this offseason, during training camp. LA Rams, they signed Blake Bortles, Malcolm Brown, Clay Matthews, Eric Weddle, and re-signed Dante Fowler. They're making moves upon moves, and they still are going to get through a lot of salary cap issues in the next coming seasons. But man, they're just they don't stop with these Rams. They signed Eric Weddle for 2 years. That's a huge one right there. Eric Weddle has been a huge part of that Ravens defense, and he's been very good for so many years. I've loved him ever since he was a San Diego Charger. And he's been one of those most underrated safeties, I feel, in my opinion. He's a very, very good safety up there. So the Rams get a huge weapon there. Then, of course, they re-signed Dante Fowler to try to prove if he is still good enough. He was okay coming in when they traded for him during the trade deadline. But hopefully they will prove it there with that 1-year contract. Then they get Malcolm Brown as a solidifier without Todd Gurley or C.J. Anderson if they're not there, so that's a good signing there. And then they obviously get Clay Matthews, Blake Bortles to back up Jared Goff, and then Clay Matthews, the big defensive lineman, the big linebacker, middle linebacker from the Green Bay Packers, to try to get him some leadership in the locker room too, so that's very big for them too. So hopefully this works out for them because they need more run-stopping linebackers. So I think Clay Matthews in a mesh of linebackers that are kind of inexperienced for this Rams team will really solidify how that run game defense will work out for them. Then the Miami Dolphins, they signed Eric Rowe. That's a huge one. He was from the Kansas City Chiefs as well, so that gives them another corner to pair up with Xavier Howard. They signed Ryan Fitzpatrick to try to maybe start him. I'm not exactly sure what the Dolphins are trying to do here with the quarterback position, since they don't have Tannehill. But other than Ryan Fitzpatrick, they don't really have a lot of quarterbacks that could start, really. So I'm not sure if they want to keep it like this or if they want to draft the quarterback. Hopefully they are drafting a quarterback, because Dolphins fans, I pray you mercy if you guys keep this quarterback depth chart, because I'm just hoping that you really draft the quarterback at this point. I think that's what they're banking on, but you can't obviously predict it if not, but hopefully they do draft a quarterback because they're going to need one. Then they also signed Dwayne Allen as a tight end. He was the former Patriot for a couple years. Try to get them another weapon, because they're going to need more weapons for whatever quarterback they choose to, have throwing to them. So, yeah, lots of things that need to go well for the Dolphins at this point this season, because there's a lot of questions on offense right now. Minnesota Vikings, they re-signed Dan Bailey. So they keep the kicker position there. They got Josh Klein and the offensive line. So that's another. They're trying to revamp this offensive line. They got him from the Tennessee Titans, so he's a pretty good signing for them. Josh Klein wasn't too bad with the Titans last season either. They also signed Amir Abdullah, the former Detroit Lion, to try to get some more backup in the running back positions. They also got Anthony Barr back, as he was initially deciding to go with the Jets before the league opened up on Wednesday, I believe it was. But then Barr changed his mind, because he got a pretty good contract for 5 years, $67.5 million. And he's going to be up, and it's worth up to $77.5 million if he can get it. And he's getting $33 million guaranteed. So, I mean, he couldn't really walk away from a deal like that. So the Vikings made a couple of moves to try to solidify their defense there. Then the Patriots, they got Michael Bennett, the defensive end, for a 2025th and 7th round pick. And they also re-signed Philip Dorsett and Jason McCourty. So they get Philip Dorsett back, the weapon on offense, and Jason McCourty, the weapon on defense. And then a pretty good pass rusher in Michael Bennett. The Patriots making some kind of moves here in free agency, so that's pretty good. The Saints, they get Teddy Bridgewater back for a year and $12.5 million, so they don't want Bridgewater going anywhere anytime soon. They also signed Jared Cook for a year and $8 million. That is huge, because Jared Cook was an absolute weapon for the Oakland Raiders, and he got a Pro Bowl last season because of it. He's a really good tight end. If the Saints could find a way to use him, he could be probably as dangerous as Jimmy Graham was when he was with the Saints. So that is a good signing for them. Then they also got Latavius Murray too to back up Alvin Kamara, since they lost Mark Ingram to the Ravens. So that's another good signing right there. And they get two good running backs to try to change up a little bit. And they also re-signed Will Lutz to keep the kicker position going, so that's good for them as well. So all overall, the Saints did a very good job this free agency. New York Giants, they signed Antoine Bethea, the veteran safety who was 34 years old, and they signed him for 2 years. Not a 1-year deal, it's a 2-year deal. So Antoine Bethea goes to the New York Giants after having some tenure with the Arizona Cardinals. So he goes to the Giants, see if he can help them, since the Giants lost Landon Collins to the Washington Redskins. Then they also got Peppers and Zeitler from the trade from OBJ and Vernon, so that they get Peppers and Zeitler, a good offensive guard, because they needed an offensive line. They needed a better offensive line to solidify there, and they get Jabril Peppers to pair up with Antoine Bethea. So pretty good safety lineup there, and they could also move Jabril Peppers to cornerback, so they have some leeway there as well. And they also signed Golden Tate as kind of a replacement for OBJ, obviously, but not definitely on the level of him. But they signed Golden Tate for 4 years and $37.5 million to try to get some kind of offensive weapon going for Eli Manning or whatever quarterback they decide to draft, probably in the draft this upcoming April. And then we move across the state to go to the New York Jets, who got a lot of people. First of all, Le'Veon Bell. That's obviously the biggest one there. Le'Veon Bell goes to the Jets. They get a terrific running back, hopefully a terrific running back. But, yeah, I mean, the whole Le'Veon Bell contract and issue was really weird in Pittsburgh. I mean, he gets signed for 4 years, worth $52.5 million, that includes $25 million guaranteed. So, definitely not the one he was definitely wanting in the beginning of the season, last season. But I guess he's still with another team, so it doesn't really matter either way. Then they also got Josh Bellamy as another wide receiver. They got Jamison Crowder as another wide receiver, so they're trying to get some weapons going in the receiver realm. They also got C.J. Mosley from the Baltimore Ravens defense as well. He's been a very good linebacker / defensive end for a long time. He actually started out in defensive line, so they could move him around as they wish, but he is a linebacker right now. He's a pretty good linebacker at that. Then they also got Kelechi Osemele, so they signed a lot of guys here. Osemele, they got him from the Raiders. He's a very, very good offensive guard. I am very surprised, and my goodness, they got him for a steal. Only for a 5th-round pick, they got Osemele. And Osemele has gotten a few Pro Bowls, mind you, and has done a pretty fantastic job as an offensive guard ever since he was with the Ravens and the Raiders. So they got him for a pretty big steal, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. But in any case, they get a good signing with him. They also signed Canton Nazero, the kicker, because they lost Jason Myers to the Seattle Seahawks. So they had to sign Canton Nazero as a kicker to try to get something going back since they lost him. And they also got Trevor Siemian as a backup for Sam Darnold and Brian Poole from the Atlanta Falcons. This makes me so sad because I really love Brian Poole as a nickel corner, possibly even a second corner if they can develop him there. So they get Brian Poole. That's a pretty good signing for them. I really did like Brian Poole as a nickel corner when he was with the Falcons. Now to the Oakland Raiders. This is the big one, of course. Antonio Brown going from Steel City to the Black Hole in exchange for 2019 draft picks, round 3 and round 5. Now, a lot of people are, big controversy with this. What I'm hearing from a lot of the insiders, and especially in Rappaport, is that the contract was the issue when it comes to the value of Antonio Brown. It wasn't his stardom, and it wasn't him being the best wide receiver in all of football. The fact that he was only exchanged for those 2 round picks and pretty much nothing else is an absolute steal for the Raiders. But it was really because of the contract situation that was going on with him, and it worked for them either way because they signed him for 3 years with $50 million and $30 million guaranteed. So that's still a pretty darn good deal for a wide receiver like Antonio Brown. And I feel like it wasn't very fair to value him based on the contract. I feel like you should have valued him based on his stardom, but that's just me, I guess. But I guess the Steelers didn't see it that way for whatever reason. So the Raiders basically got a steal for him. They also got Trent Brown, signed him for 4 years to $66 million, so that's pretty good there. They want to solidify their offensive line since they lost, obviously, Kelechi Osemele, but he was also an offensive guard, so I'm not sure if an offensive tackle is going to be able to replace that. They got Vontaze Burfict back, not back, but I mean they got him for a year to try to prove it, but obviously he's had a lot of discipline issues and a lot of suspension issues, so if he could clean that up, you could still be a pretty good football player for them. They got Mike Glennon as a backup quarterback for Derek Carr. Jonathan Hankins from the Giants, pretty good defensive lineman there. They re-signed Dwayne Harris, the kick returner, the pretty good kick returner from last season. Pretty much one of the best out there. They also got LaMarcus Joyner from the Rams. That's a big signing there because that gives them a huge safety. So getting LaMarcus Joyner from the Rams, that's a huge signing for them. He's a very good safety in the backfield. They also got J.J. Nelson, the former Arizona Cardinal. He's not a big signing, but they could use him maybe. Hopefully, if they use him correctly, they can get some weapons going for him. But they also got Tyrell Williams. Tyrell Williams was with the Chargers formerly. They signed him for a 4-year, $44 million contract. So they are putting a lot of value on Tyrell Williams here. So hopefully that works out for them. But man, that's a pretty hefty baggage for a wide receiver who was only used in so many games for the Chargers. He was pretty much like their fourth or third guy on the wide receiver depth chart, and they didn't really use him much as much, right? Mainly as a deep threat. So maybe that's what the Raiders are signing him for. But it's a little mind-boggling to me, but hopefully that will work out for them. Philadelphia Eagles, they made a couple signings as well. They got Vinny Curry and Deshaun Jackson back. Deshaun Jackson being back in Philly is probably one of the best things that I have ever wanted to see because, man, I kind of miss Deshaun Jackson when he was in Philly. I'm not going to lie. So seeing him back in Philly is definitely a good sign to see. I can't wait to see if they will use him there, but obviously he's aged, so hopefully that still works out for them there. And obviously the Bucs traded him because they needed some more stuff. They wanted to get rid of the cap on him as well. The Eagles also got Ronald Darby back and Brandon Graham re-signed, so that's good for them. They keep those two defensive weapons there. They got Malik Jackson from Jacksonville, so good defensive lineman there since they lost Michael Bennett. And Andrew Sendejo from the Minnesota Vikings, giving them another safety help besides Rodney McLeod and Malcolm Jenkins if one of them gets injured, or possibly a replacement for Rodney McLeod if he doesn't do well, something like that. But they could even use him as a dime or quarter cornerback, so they could use him any way possible. There's a pretty good signings for the Eagles in free agency this year. Pittsburgh Steelers re-sign Ramon Foster. They re-sign Eli Rogers as well. So they get the offensive guard back and the wide receiver back for them to try to keep them going. But that's pretty much all they did in this free agency as far as big thing goes. Now here comes the biggest part. San Francisco 49ers, did they make some moves? First of all, we're going to start off with tagging Robbie Gould, so they keep the kicker there, which actually happens a lot more often than you think. A lot of kickers are actually franchise tagged as much as defensive linemen, apparently. This is mainly because kickers are cheaper to franchise tag than to sign with contracts. But when it comes to like great kickers like Justin Tucker, Robbie Gould, even Graham Gano might even be up for franchise tagging for the Carolina Panthers. All these kickers are that great, but at the same time, it's hard wanting to long-term to try to figure out a long-term contract for these guys because you never know if a kicker is going to do bad. That's the problem. It's like a lot of teams have gone through this. I mean, you look at like the Blair Walsh situation when he was in Seattle and Minnesota. You look at a lot of Kent Nazero when he was with Arizona. Like when he was pretty good, and a lot of other guys and guys like that. You never know if any of those guys are going to do bad at some point. So it's almost kind of a fearful tactic for teams to long-term contract sign any kicker. So it actually happens a lot more often than you think. Again, since the concept was introduced in 2007, 14 linebackers have been tagged, which is the most. Then 12 defensive ends were tagged since 2007, and that is actually tied with the amount of kickers that have been tagged, which is also 12. So, yeah, kickers actually get franchise tagged a lot more than some people think, and some people think it's crazy, but it actually happens a lot more often. And then again, that's really just because you don't ever know if a kicker's going to do bad sometimes. Yeah, so the 49ers tag Robbie Gould. They signed Tevin Coleman, the former running back for the Atlanta Falcons, for 2 years to try to solidify that, and the other running back that I can't think of right now for some reason. And so they get another great running back in Tevin Coleman. He could possibly start for them. They also got Dee Ford from the Kansas City Chiefs. Huge defensive line upgrade right there. 5 years, $87.5 million. That's a huge contract for them. And they also get linebacker help with Quan Alexander from the Tampa Bay Bucks. He goes on for 4 years and $54 million. So that's another big one right there. Then they also signed Jordan Matthews, a wide receiver from the former Buffalo Bill and Philadelphia Eagle. So that's pretty good. Jason Verrett, also for a year, the former cornerback from the Chargers, although he's had a lot of injury issues for the last couple seasons. So if he can get rid of those injury problems, he could still be a pretty good secondary guy for the 49ers there. But this is a lot of good signings for the 49ers this season. They're really solidifying their defense, and if their offense can keep on going with this running game, this could do wonders for them in the NFC West. And now we have the last 4 teams, and starting off with the Seattle Seahawks, they tagged Frank Clark, so they keep the defensive end there. He's a huge factor when it comes to the defense, so that's a very good signing that's a good tagging for them. They re-signed DJ Fluker, KJ Wright, and Michael Kendricks. So they get DJ Fluker back to solidifying the offensive line. He struggled a little bit in the beginning of the season, but then got better as it went through. Then they get KJ Wright back. Man, they're never going to get rid of this guy. KJ Wright has been just a solidified outside linebacker for this team for so long. And I mean, he's won the Super Bowl with them, of course. He's pretty much, him and Bobby Wagner are the only guys pretty much left in that defense from that Super Bowl winning team. And then they also signed Michael Kendricks to try to prove it. Got Kendricks back to try to at least prove himself still. They also got Jason Myers. Jason Myers, that's a huge signing because they pair him up with the punter Ed Dixon. Man, special teams, that's a deadly duo right there. They get pretty much one of the best kickers in the league, and they already paired this up with pretty much the best punter in the league. So this is huge. For the Seattle Seahawks. They get a huge special teams duo there. And they also signed Mike Iupati for a year to try to see where he can go in the offensive line and maybe see if he can get something back since when he was with the 49ers, he was doing pretty good. But then when he was with the Cardinals, it really kind of fell flat for him. He's had some injury issues here and there, but maybe he can get something back when he's with the Seahawks here. Tampa Bay Bucks, they didn't do much. They signed Deion Buchanan for a year to try to get a linebacker replacement for Quan Alexander. They also re-signed Donovan Smith, the offensive tackle, for 3 years. He's a really good offensive tackle for them. Pretty much one of their best on the line. So getting him back for 3 years is good for them as well to solidify the offensive line. But in the end, still need to figure out a lot of things on offense and defense, really, for the Bucs. The Tennessee Titans, they signed a pretty good amount of guys. Adam Humphries, they got him from the Tampa Bay Bucs, speaking of which, for 4 years and $36 million. That's a pretty good deal, but they're putting a lot on Adam Humphries for him to be successful for 4 years. He did do pretty good for the Bucs as the second guy across from Mike Evans, but hopefully that will solidify there as he is there for 4 years. Then they also got Roger Saffold, the offensive guard, for 4 years as well for $44 million. That's a huge one there. They lost Josh Klein, so getting Roger Saffold as a replacement there is a huge signing there as well, and he is one of the best in the league as far as offensive guard goes when he was with the Rams. They also got Ryan Tannehill as a backup for Marcus Mariota. They traded him for only a 7th and 4th rounder, and they also gave up a 6th rounder for him too, so not a bad deal for them as well for a backup quarterback. They got Cameron Wake for 3 years. That's a pretty good one right there. Gets another defensive weapon for them on the defensive line. Then they got Kenny Vaccaro re-signed for 4 years for the safety, so they keep the safety there. They're revamping. They're pretty much just making sure that the defense is solid and being able to just get a few offensive signings here or there. So the Titans are looking good in the free agency so far. And then our last team, the Washington Redskins, as it goes in alphabetical order. Landon Collins, that's the big one right there for 6 years. That's the longest contract out of this free agency right now. 6 years, $84 million, $45 million guaranteed. So 6-year contract for Landon Collins. That's a big baggage that he's going to carry, so he's got to do good for the Washington Redskins there. They get Case Keenum. Case Keenum as a starting quarterback, since Alex Smith is not going, at least it sounds like Alex Smith is not going to be back since he took that injury. It still looks pretty bad, so they still need to get another quarterback, I believe. Case Keenum might not be their answer, but we'll see what they do with the quarterback position in the draft. They also re-signed Adrian Peterson, so even if they don't have a solidified quarterback, they at least have the running game with Adrian Peterson at least. And he gets actually re-signed for 2 years, not 1 year. Kind of a surprise there, so they will keep him for 2 years instead, but they still get him for $8 million, so it's still a pretty good deal. They also got DRC. They got Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie. He came out of retirement to sign with the Redskins for a year, so they can get 2 former Giants in Landon Collins and DRC, and actually Eric Flowers too. They got Eric Flowers as well, the offensive tackle, for 1 year. Not sure if they're going to start him, obviously, since Trent Williams is there. I'm not sure exactly who is on the other side with him, but Eric Flowers, they signed him for another year, maybe to try to, maybe as a replacement or as a backup offensive tackle, maybe try to see if he can implement them there, but ultimately it's a 1-year contract. All right, so that does it for the free agency signings. I hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Week 5 now on this podcast. Next week, I believe we're going to go back into the season predictions, since the draft is almost around the corner, but I'm going to try to see if I can get a mock draft in beforehand, because I'll be out for another week, since I'll be going out of town for a conference again. So we're going to have another week off. But in any case, I'll try to get a mock draft going before the draft hits, since it's going to be in late April. But I think next week we're still going to go back to the season predictions, and obviously a lot is going to change in that season predictions now, because after this free agency, a lot has changed. So we'll see what happens there. But for now, we pass the ball over to you. We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast.